What's going on here? Alexa, turn on the key light. What's up, YouTube? In this episode, we're going to be looking at ASP.NET Middleware. This is part 2. So if you haven't watched part 1, please take a look at it over here. I'll put a link to it over here. Watching that video is a prerequisite to this one. So I'll make an assumption, of course, that either you watched that video before or you already know what ASP.NET Middleware is, and you want to just go a little further than what was covered in the previous video. All right. Today, we're going to be talking primarily about the map and the MapWhen methods on the app builder class. Last time we looked at use and run. Today, we're going to be looking at map and MapWhen. So just as a recap, in the previous video, I showed you or talked about the middleware that sort of sat in the middle in the pipeline. And you could have any number of middleware here as long as they were all middleware that were chaining from one to the next rather than a terminating middleware. And that is determined by whether you use the app.use or the app.run capability, which is over here. So if you use the app.run, it's a terminating middleware. If you use the use method, it is a chaining middleware. So we're going to be just looking at these two briefly. But in today's video, we're really talking about the when map and the MapWhen, which is essentially branching. So within a pipeline, you can actually have multiple branches. You can say, okay, conditionally, based on some condition, I want to go down this path. And this path is a whole separate middleware as compared to this other path, which is a whole separate middleware and so on. So you can have any number of branches or any number of reasons to branch. And each branch could potentially be an entire middleware pipeline that is specific to that condition logic. And the logic is based on the request path, right? So essentially what happens here, as you can see in the slide, there's the income from the web server. And when you get a request coming into the pipeline, you have the option to branch conditionally. You can see based on certain criteria, you either want to go down this path or this path. And each of these could be an entire middleware pipeline for a certain branch. Or you could go a step further if you wanted or if you needed, where the request branching is just a portion of the entire pipeline. In other words, you can have some features, some pipeline features before you decide to branch, and then some pipeline features after you finish the branching. Of course, then that implies that none of these middleware here are terminating, since you want to come through this and then come into here rather than terminate over here somewhere. Right? So you have these options. You can either branch directly, or you can have something that's common across all your branching logic and then branch. And you can also have something that's common after your branching logic. So it's a choice that you have here. Right? So that's just briefly, I want to show you this is what it is. Keep in mind also that the use is a chaining middleware, whereas the .run is a terminating middleware. So we can look at that briefly. I'm going to start with a empty .NET Core 3 project. The .NET Core 3 has some new middleware, the route and the endpoints middleware. So just keep in mind that you'll see that code. If you don't see that in your version of ASP.NET, you're not probably using .NET 3.0, .NET Core 3.0. All right. Okay, so start with a brand new empty project. Let's look at the startup here. So this is empty. So this is typically where you would, in your configure method, you're essentially setting up your middleware. Right? In this case, they've got this logic here. If it's development, then do this. Otherwise, don't do this part, the develop page part. And we'll get back to this sort of thing later on in this video. And the app, the routing and the endpoints. So this is the bare minimum. In this case, they're setting up also the endpoints here. Right? So I'm just going to delete all of this since I don't want to use any of this here. I'm going to just keep something really simple for now. So we'll do the app.use. And this takes in, as you remove from before, it takes in a func that is takes in a request delegate and returns a request delegate. So this is the incoming and this is the output, right? So the use takes two takes a func that takes 2 arguments. So in this case, we can just do it inline. So we can say async context and the next. Okay, and in here, you could say and I'll add some more. So these are all different middleware in the pipeline. Okay, I'll just change some things here for each of these. I'll just call this terminating. But we also need to call the next method there, the next delegate. And this one I'm just going to change to be the terminating method. So we don't need, there's no next delegate here. So if I would run this now, you'll see that we'll see the H1 middleware 1, H2 middleware 2, and of course this will be rendered in HTML form, and H3 here with the terminating middleware, just to get everyone up to speed with how middleware works, so that I can have a sort of a platform on which to start and do the stuff I want to talk about in this episode. So here you see middleware 1, middleware 2, and the terminating middleware, right? Okay. So now what I want to talk about is the map. So the app.map method, this is an extension method. It takes a path string, as you can see here. It takes a path string, and then it takes a iApplication builder. The iApplication builder is the same as what we get in this method argument here, right? So it's the same thing. So in the map, you get a request path string, sorry. So that could be just a string in this case. And then, they call it configuration. So I'm going to stay idiomatic to what their signature is. I'm just going to call it configuration, even though we know it's the app builder, application builder. So I'm going to call it configuration here. And there you go. All right. So here, we could have, I'm going to put all of these middleware that I have here inside of this condition. And now this is the map, the path string. So this could be anything that's part of the path, right? So if you don't know what the path is part after the domain name, if you will, in the URL, you have ///. So that's called the path. So you could conditionally branch based on a certain path. So let's say if you have /API, then go down this branch. But the branch, as you can see here, is an entire pipeline, right? It's not just a small portion of it. It could be the entire pipeline that you want to have executed. So let's just introduce over here. Let's call it V1 /V1. Okay. And I'll just copy all of this and have another middleware conditionally based on V2. And so over here, I'm going to call it V1 middleware 1, and then over here I'm going to call it B2, right? So if the path is V1, then it's going to execute all of this middleware, and if it's V2, it's going to execute all of this middleware, right? Now here, just be careful to actually use the argument here that's coming in. Okay. All right. So now let's run this. And of course, by default, it's going to do nothing since we don't have any middleware that handles the case where it's not a V1 or V2. So we get this. But if I did V1, I'll see this middleware. And if I did, let's say V2, I'll see this middleware. Right? So the entire pipeline has been modified or changed conditionally. Either it's V1 or V2. It's not just one or two things. It could be the entire pipeline. Now, as showed in the slide before, you could have something before the pipeline branching and some things after the pipeline branching. As long as the stuff in the middle is not terminating, then of course it'll come through the branching and come back and join the sort of the main logic, if you will, right? So now where would you use this sort of thing? And I'm going to simplify this a little bit so we can, when we look at the sort of more real world use case in the next part, it'll make a lot more sense. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at just the fix up of the code. If you look at this, the signature here, it's essentially saying it needs some action, right? It needs some action that provides an application builder as an argument. The action, of course, returns nothing, but it gets an argument of application builder. And they're calling it configuration, but basically it's a method that gets that as an argument and returns nothing. So what if we were to do that ourselves? What if we had a method? So let's call this V1 pipeline. And this were a method, let's say here. Let's call it a private static method that returns a void. And it's called that, and it takes an application builder, and we'll call it app again, just to stay consistent with ASP.NET Core's nomenclature. I'm going to take all of this and put it in here. Of course, I also change the configuration to app again. All right, and this is not required. So essentially what I've done is taken all the logic and just put it in a method that has the signature required, and then the method has the entire logic here rather than cluttering up the configure method, right? I'll do the same for this. Let's call it V2 pipeline. All right. And copy all of this and put it in that method. Oops, a mistake. And change configuration to app. All right. So this is just a little cleaner, but you can see it's based on the branching logic here. So in this case, this is v/v1, v2, and what's happening is over here. Now, even though it'll come here, this method is only executed at startup one time. It's not repeatedly executed. Of course, you'll see the logic coming in here or the big point stopping here because that code is what you've asked it to execute conditionally. But it's not like it's registering the entire pipeline over and over again, right? That's already been done on startup. All that's happening is the code is executing based on every request. As you can see here, this is only working with the path. The map.when method allows you to determine your condition on anything to do with the HTTP context. Something in the header, something in the cookies, something in the path, something in the forms, the content, the body, anything. So that's basically the difference between the map, which only allows you path-based logic, and map.when that allows you to have some logic based on a context. So I won't really look at that aspect. Again, if you need to check that out, please check that out because that's giving you a lot more control over, let's say, HTTP header-based logic or a header and cookie-based logic or path and header-based logic. So you can have all kinds of combinations and you're essentially returning a true or a false. So it's a condition, right? So based on the HTTP context, you return a true or a false to tell you to say whether you should execute this path on this condition or not. So whatever that condition is can be based on anything to do with the HTTP context. In this case, we just limit it to the path string, all right? The other thing to take a look at here is, let's say in this method here, once we get come into the V1 pipeline, right? We get a context. What if I wanted to look at the context dot request dot path? All right, I'm just gonna assign this to a local variable here, put a breakpoint. Put a breakpoint here. And let's go to V1. Okay. So it comes in here. Now we know that we put in a path of /V1 here. Okay. What do we get when we come here and we look at the path? We see that this path is empty. It's got nothing there, right? It has a blank value. So this is a key thing to remember when you're using the map feature. When you map on a certain path, then that entire path, the prefix in this case /V1, is not part of the path anymore once it comes into this logic, right? So that /V1 is not going to be matching on a path. If you require V1 to be in your logic, you're not going to find it, right? It's not going to be there. That's a key part that you have to keep in mind, that disappears, if you will, but eats away the starting part of the path and leaves you with the rest. For example, so let's say we had some logic in the URL here. So /V1, let's say /API, right? So what will happen is in the path here, you'll see it's not V1, it's only /API. The /V1 has disappeared from your actual path. So it has modified the path once it matches this condition. Right? So that's a very important thing to keep in mind, because you'll have controllers, let's say, and I'll talk about that in the next part of this episode. But the control's already expecting a certain path. So if you branch on that path, then it's not going to match the controller, because the controller expects to find the path, but it's not there, right? So in this case, even though we've put in /V1 /API, what you see in the code here is it's just, let me show you the, oops. Trying to zoom in here. Okay. So if you look at the path here, it's just API /API. It's not /V1 /API. Make sense? All right. So now let's exit out of here. Okay. So now having done that, I'm going to now show you a real world application, try and explain some of the reasons for why I think you could use the .map method or MapWhen method here in this scenario, because that's sort of a valid scenario. So typically in a real world application, you could be supporting Web API. You could be supporting in the same application. You might have MVC, Web API, let's say gRPC, SignalR, pretty much anything that ASP.NET Core supports, you might have in one application. So you can imagine that based on what is really going on, like the request has come in for what purpose, if you will. Has it come in for the gRPC purpose? Is it coming for SignalR? Is it coming for your an MVC application like a web page or Razor page? Or is it a Web API, right? And the reason I bring this up is because very frequently you want to be able to control the pipeline differently based on whether this request is coming for Web API reasons, or is it coming for MVC or Razor page reasons, or is it coming for gRPC or SignalR reasons, right? So let's look at another application that I have here. Now this one supports both Razor pages and it supports Web API. I'm going to show you how it works, and then discuss some of the things that are not quite working as expected and how we can use the map method or MapWhen method to fix some of that nuance, right? Okay, so as I said, it supports Razor pages as well as Web API. Right? So this is the Web API controller, in this case, movies controller, that is mapped to API / in this case, movies. And there's a Razor page as well. So let's look at the Razor page. Now this is a real application that is actually going to the database and stuff like that. So it's too bit to start up. Okay, so here's the Razor page, essentially showing you all of the movies in a list, simplistic API. But you can see this is a Razor page part, right? Now, if I went to the end API endpoints, so /API /movies, you'll see this is returning JSON, right? So for the JSON part, I'm going to use Postman rather than the browser, so it's easier to see it. So here's Postman, and it shows you the JSON. It shows you the status code and the time, etc. And you can also see the raw data if you want it. All right. So that's the API endpoint. And over here, we'll stick to using the page or Razor page endpoint. Same application, two different modalities, if you will, where it supports web pages and web API. All right. The form or the way you communicate over these two different modalities, of course, is different with web API. Now, in particular, what I'm going to show you is the issue that I typically come across or hit upon here is this portion. So here is the pipeline. It's configured. So you can see use static files, use routing. Then with the want authorization, authentication that comes in the middle between routing and endpoints. This is API, .NET Core API, .NET Core 3.0. So this is new for .NET Core 3.0. And then you also map the Razor pages or the controller out. Okay. As you can see here, I have got my own middleware that does the exception handling. Now this, I'm not going to go into the details of the exception handling here, but there's a whole video. I'll put a link to that up here that talks about this middleware piece and the exception handling. So please take a look at that video if you don't understand, if you want, interested in looking at that part here. But this custom exception handling, and I'll show you how this works. It essentially, since this application was built for web API primarily, its exception handling had to be specific to web API's requirement. So here, for example, if I go into /genre, let's say action, hopefully you can see that. Maybe I should zoom in so you can see it. Send, you see I get back 200 OK, and I get back some data, and the genre for the movies is action, right? Now what happens if I give it a genre that doesn't exist, like that? Then I can see it says status code 400 with the invalid genre here. And then there's a message that says the string blah, blah, blah is not a valid genre. Valid values are action, comedy, etc. And in the headers, I can see there's an additional header here, the exception type header that says it's invalid genre exception. All right. So this was, let's say, is a requirement for the web API aspect of the system. So it's doing what it's supposed to do from a web API standpoint. And it works fantastic. And there are a bunch of applications that use this service and they expect this header and the 400 status code with the reason phrase and all that, as I showed you just now. Cool. On the web page now, let's say if I did the same thing, so I say genre equals action. You see it works. So I get only the action movies here. Now that's it. But what if I did genre equals XXX? I see this. But at this point, from a web browser perspective, this is not a good enough response. It seems weird. I don't see all the information. I'm not sure what really happened. And especially when I'm doing, say, let's say development, I'm losing a lot of information that might be able to help me understand the problem better. So effectively, what I want to do is this. I want this portion to actually work. Right? Essentially, I want this portion to work and this not to be there for the web pages. So I don't want this custom exception handling for the Razor pages aspect. I'll just take this out for now. But I want this to be used. Let's see what this looks like from a web page standpoint. Okay, so then we say genre / action, still working. Oops, what was that? Okay, so this is showing all the action movies, but if you put in something else that's not there, we now see this page. So this is a lot more helpful than the previous page, at least, let's say at least for development's sake, but then for production purposes, you could take the same thing and make a more specialized error page if you wanted, rather than that single one-liner, right? So in a situation where your application is doing multiple things like gRPC and SignalR and MVC or Web API and web pages, then you might need different pipeline paths. Okay, so we're going to do that here for this application now, where we have different paths for the different endpoints, if you will. Right. So with the help of some magic, I've modified the path. So essentially what I've done is I've got in the configure, I've essentially got these two mappings. I'm saying /API. You can map the API, configure API pipeline, and for everything else, do this. Now remember, this path here is going to be, it'll map on this /API path, but by the time it comes in past this, that /API is missing, right? So in other words, we wouldn't need to say API/API for it to actually work as it was before, the controllers part, right? So what I'm going to do here, I'm just, instead of confusing it, I'm going to call this, let's say v2. So in our URL, we need something like /v2/API for it to still work. But if you don't have anything, it'll come here to the Razor Pages pipeline. Okay, now let's look at that whole thing. We can just take this all out. I don't want all of this here. All right. So for the configure API pipeline, it comes into this method. And as you can see here, we use the custom exception handling. Then we say use routing, and we say use endpoints. In this case, we're only mapping the use controller route endpoints. Endpoint actually is a global connection. So even though I'm just doing this portion here for map controller route, and here I'm saying map Razor Pages, it's not like it's not doing both. The endpoints collection is the same, so both of them have already been registered. But what's key is everything else that happens before could be different based on. So here, if you're using SignalR, you say, map hub and so on. Idea is that these are completely different pipelines based on certain criteria, rather than having to do conditional logic within the same method. Right? So that's the sort of big benefit of map and MapWhen is you can conditionally have completely different pipelines. I'm going to show you that. I'm showing that example here. Okay, let's see this working so you'll understand what I'm saying. So this is showing me the page. And let me show you from Postman. Let's use our, so instead of just API, I'm going to have to do, let me zoom in here so you can see what I'm doing. I need to add the v2/API/. Right? So if I just did the movies part here, you'll see that we get a 200 response, okay, and in the body we get our data, so that works. So v2/API, right, was the logic that we have there. And then if I did /genre/action, then that gives me all the action movies. But if I put in some other genre that doesn't exist, then I get this. I get the expected result here. I get the 400 status code, invalid genre, reason phrase. I get the message over here, and the headers I see my invalid genre exception header or exception type header with this value. So this is all exactly how we would expect, or we want this to work with the web API portion of things. Right, let's look at the Razor Page part now. So here, if you said genre/action, we get the action movies. But if you said genre/some other, hey, look, we got our expected exception handling aspect as well. So not only is this a development feature, but I'm saying in production as well, you can have different branches based on whether you want to follow your web API. It's, at least in the way I build a web API, my pipelines are very different, or at least especially the exception handling is very different from a web page aspect. So that as a result, you can go over different branches and the pipeline is completely different. So you have a lot more flexibility. You don't have to have a bunch of conditional logic, all kind of shoved into that one configure method and trying to figure out like what actually happens based on certain criteria. The map gives you the clean way to kind of separate out complete pipelines based on a certain criteria, in this case, path of the URL, right? So I hope this has been a helpful discussion and a useful discussion. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, and I will see you next time.